Alrighty guys, welcome to episode 22 of the TM GolfCast, and in this episode we talk to the host of the PGA Jay Show, Jay LeDuc, and we talk a lot about everything, so let's get started with episode 22, Jay LeDuc of the PGA Jay Show. So I am with somebody who's awesome with the PGM students, who reaches out to everybody in PGM, no matter what university, PGA Jay. So you've been doing the PGA Jay Show for how long now?
I think it's like a year and a half, I think. Yeah,
Okay.
About that.
Now, what got you started in that? What made you want to start your own podcast?
I hated being on video, so that was a big part of it. I started out, I remember when I was an assistant golf professional, going on YouTube and trying to search every iteration of basically finding a golf professional that was talking about what it's really like to be a golf professional, and trying to get some kind of mentorship through that. It didn't exist, and I thought, well, hopefully somebody does this. And then 5 years later, 6 years later, it still wasn't there, and I kind of thought, well, maybe I could do that. So I started to do videos on YouTube. You can still see them on my channel. They're still there. I keep them there for anybody that's afraid to put out video. It's a good place to go and look and see me be terrible, and you can see it'll take a lot of the heat off of you. But I didn't love the camera. I like people. Mm-hmm. This is easy for me to kind of have a conversation. But I didn't like the camera because I couldn't see the reaction.
Okay,
so I didn't know if I was making my point was being well, iterated, or so I didn't like that part of it, and it was very frustrating. At some point, I'll probably have the guts to actually put some of the outtakes on YouTube as well, the hours of it. But it was just too much production. It was too much of that. So I thought, well, what if I just did the audio? What if I just did a podcast? And around the time, the app that I use, Anchor, and this is not sponsored.
Yeah, it's not sponsored.
You do too, but they were like, you can do a podcast from your phone. And I was like, oh, well, that sounds easy. Let me try that. And then it just kind of started, and it has gone through many. If you listen to the kind of 100 episodes, it started as one thing, and then it's kind of, I tried a couple of things throughout, and yeah, that's how it all kind of started and evolved.
That's awesome. Now, where are you at now in the industry? What part of the industry do you work in? You're not at a golf course.
Correct. Yes. So I have a full-time job. I work for a company that is a private luxury home exchange club.
Okay.
So I'm in kind of the private sector, but we are still a private club. Mm-hmm. We do a lot with golf courses and facilities like that. But this is kind of a full-time second job, if you will. So I create content, mm-hmm. And I do a little bit of advising. I wouldn't necessarily even call it consulting. I just don't like the word consulting, but having conversations with companies to kind of be a sounding board, much like I am for the PGM community and for assistant pros. People are starting companies in the golf space that want some insight from somebody that's been in that world before. So I do a little bit of that as well. That's
awesome. And that shows that, there's so many areas of the golf industry you can work in. You just don't have to pick green grass. If that's not your passion, you don't have to do it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point you make, because that's actually what I thought the podcast was going to be at first, because I was kind of on a track as an assistant pro, and I kept hearing from everybody, we got to get you in GM school, you got to be a GM, you're going to be a great GM. And I was like, I do not, I'm self-aware enough to know that I don't like being kind of the last line of defense. Yeah. It's just a little bit, I like to kind of have a little creative safe space to play in, mm-hmm. right underneath that. So I was like, well, where do I go and what do I do? So I thought initially that the podcast was going to be interviewing people that had different jobs in the arena, yeah. Whether it's a regional sales rep for a golf cart company or a consulting company or a design firm or whatever it was, how you could kind of, because I think when people start out, it's like, I'm either going to be a head pro, mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to be an instructor,
exactly, yeah.
I'm going to be a GM, and and then you start to get into the apparel reps, those kind of other things that people don't know that you can do. Mm-hmm. So that's what I thought it was going to be at first, and then I realized that just with my full-time work, I don't schedule well.
Okay.
So I just had to be able to just kind of, and that's why I've never really interviewed on the podcast, because I just need to be able to be tell my wife, hey, I'm going to do a podcast, I'll be back in 30 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
Be able to have an idea and go and do it, and not have this pending, I've got to interview this person, I've got to come up with questions and things like that. So, but that's actually what I originally thought it would be. So.
Yeah, I know for me, it's definitely hard with scheduling and everything. That is one of the downsides.
Yeah.
For me, I think we were talking earlier, I love learning off of people.
Yeah.
I love learning from you, from anybody I can to increase my career, to enhance the career.
Yeah.
And I love that you're helping with your
all your ideas and all of your experiences. I love that you're helping everybody else.
Well, and that's the idea too. I mean, that's really what I as much as I'm trying to provide information, like physical, actual information, like if you listen to this, you may learn something through this anecdote. Like a lot of what I'm talking about, and you've heard me say it, is like, the tools are out there now that I didn't have. Like, my immediate network as a golf professional was typically people that I saw a couple of times a year at a section event, or a few times a year at our chapter events, and kind of got to know. But now with the internet and social media and all of that stuff, the opportunity to branch out and to learn from just different experiences that people have. Hopefully it helps people figure out what they might want to do, but also kind of like figure out which paths aren't the right paths by kind of just, getting a little bit more insight from people, instead of like, I'm going to do this, and then 5 years later realizing, oh, I didn't really want to do that. Like being able to kind of see what somebody in that space is doing, I think is super valuable.
That's awesome. Now, what is one thing, I know with the podcast, but maybe besides from the podcast, what is one thing that you do differently that would help other golf professionals?
I mean, I just always think, always trying to kind of take a step back and look at things objectively and with kind of fresh eyes. The industry's been going kind of in a direction for so long, and there's, you hear a lot of like, well, that's just the way it is, and like if you do this for 15 years, then this thing happens. And I just think that a lot of that is, there's ways to, I think that you need to kind of take a step back and look at things objectively. Really, like, are we doing this the right way? Like, is doing whatever we're doing at the club for this reason, like, why are we doing it for that? Just asking questions. I think is asking yourself the questions, being okay with being wrong. I think challenging yourself, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is like we always try to get to a place where we can be right and have the authority to be right about stuff, as opposed to maintaining kind of the humility throughout to challenge yourself. I think that's probably what I try to do every day, is kind of find out what am I doing wrong, and not be stuck in the mindset of like, this is the way that it's always been done. Some of the best successes I've had with membership retention, member activity, member satisfaction, things like that, are just stuff that we were like, what if we tried this? What I mean? Like, so I think that's the best advice that I can kind of give, and letting the facility as a golf professional, you kind of just letting the facility decide what it is. That's kind of a difficult thing to say, because then it doesn't mean members run the show. But kind of listening to that, taking it all in, and then not having to do everything. Like, hey, we need, members are like, we need to do this thing. It's not necessarily that, but you kind of take that in, and then you kind of just take a step back and say, okay, this kind of fits everything that everybody wants. So I think that's kind of.
You were at a country club, correct? Or
I've been at both country club. Most recently, I was the director of golf at a country club in Nashville.
Wow, how was that? What country club was that?
Temple Hills Country Club.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how far outside the city was that?
We were like a mile outside of Nashville proper, in a town called Franklin.
That's
so
amazing.
We were 20 minutes from downtown, 25 minutes from downtown.
That's awesome.
Marketing material said 20 minutes. It's probably more like 30.
Okay. Now, what was your experience like there? Like, what was the biggest thing you took away from that experience?
I think that the biggest thing that I took away from that experience is that when given the latitude to try to make change, you can.
Okay.
And when you're not, we went through a few ownership changes there, actually. Some didn't have much impact on the progress we were making as far as membership retention and improvements to the club, both financially and satisfaction-wise and all those things, but some did. So I think I think one of my biggest learnings there is that when you really look at the facility itself and try and figure out, like, I'm kind of to my point earlier that I don't think I made very clearly, is like, if you try and figure out what's right for that facility specifically, and kind of put your ego aside of like, this is what we did at this place, or this is what worked here, like, that doesn't always happen. So I think that given kind of the autonomy to make some decisions based on the personality of that club, I was fortunate to work for some really great general managers that kept the operation running smoothly and made sure we were tracking in the right direction, but allowed us to play around a little bit with some things, and that worked out pretty well.
What is the biggest piece of advice that you give current PGM students?
The biggest piece of advice that there's a couple of things. It's a really good question. Use what we currently have, at our disposal to network. I mean, I mentioned that. Getting on social media, probably setting up a professional account. If you have a personal one that's private, that's probably a good idea. But just take advantage of the technology that's out there to network and to meet other people. Like, they should be following you. They should also be seeing who's interacting with your content and then getting to know those people. I've never liked it when people said it's all about your network or your network is your net worth or any of those kinds of things. That's always made me super nervous because I, in general, don't like networking. Like, I don't like to walk into a cocktail party room and not know anybody.
Yeah.
I get anxious about that, but I'll sit for 3 or 4 hours on Instagram and follow somebody that commented on your down a rabbit hole and find and kind of meet new people and do that. So I think that people should take advantage of that. And then I guess it's always hard to give this advice to young people in general because I probably wouldn't take this advice super well. But understand when people give you feedback, understand what your intention is, and frame the feedback within that. So, for example, so I don't have any ambition to have 1 million followers, and I'm trying to reach young golf professionals, and I know that audience is going to be very small. So when somebody looks at my profile and says, you need to do this, you need to be, hey, you need to grow, you need to get to this, and then you're going to get sponsorships, and then you're going to get this, that's fine advice for somebody else, not for me, because I don't want that.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something that when you put those in context, but at the same time, if I get a message from a young golf professional like, hey, I didn't understand what you said here, I don't think you were very clear on saying this, then that would be feedback that I'm like, okay, I'm trying to be clear and communicate a message to that audience, and this audience is saying what you were trying to do didn't really work. That's feedback I would take to heart. So I think just kind of trying to put feedback in its place allows you to not kind of stop and start. If you're doing something and somebody gives you feedback, it lets you kind of roll that off and go, that's fine feedback, that's not what I'm trying to do. Thank you. But then at the same time, you kind of say, well, should I be doing that? No, I want to be doing it this way. So I think that that's probably the best advice I can give.
Okay. Well, there's a fine line. I think a lot of current students have a difficult issue, maybe not an issue, but trying to define the line between, okay, how do I make my Instagram profile professional? Where does not being so robotic? How do you define the line between social aspects that's professional and also career-based?
It's a really good question, and it's really hard. And that's feedback that I took from, mine kind of goes back and forth. I have always been pretty guarded, especially because I have another full-time job that's not in the golf space. So it's, I'm a little bit more protective. I've opened up a lot more. I'm on a couple different platforms. I do Snapchat and Instagram. So maybe if something's really goofy, I'll just do it on Snapchat. I know nobody professionally is following there. But at the same time, I think there's nothing wrong with starting out really professional and erring on that side.
Okay.
Like you said, you feel robotic. Probably better to feel robotic than for somebody to be like, hey, I saw you up at 2. I think that's especially college age, there's a lot that can happen. So I think that I don't think that there's anything wrong with being robotic, but being yourself within the professional environment. If you're goofing around or something like that, working on clubs or doing something like that, you're like, hey, this is a fun thing you can do or whatever. I think that there's room to do that. But I think it just takes time. I've actually noticed, I feel like in the podcast content, I was very much just kind of just curating content. And I was either reading articles or saying best practices type stuff. But where I've really seen it start to take off is getting a little bit more into the philosophical, but just kind of hey, think about this. And that people have said is really resonating, but it's uncomfortable for me to do.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
You listen to it and you kind of, so I think it just takes time and you have to be comfortable with it. Maybe setting some guidelines and saying maybe it's a good idea if I don't create content from, 4 o'clock on Friday
Yeah.
to 8 o'clock on Monday. You know what I mean?
I
Like
agree
maybe I
with
just,
that,
as
yeah.
a rule,
Yeah.
like, is this good or not? It's like, you know.
Because I can see the golf industry, you're either all for the social media aspect or you're super against it. And I think the old timers, I wouldn't say old timers, but the more older professionals have a problem with the social media aspect.
Well, it's funny because they shouldn't, because it's just, I get why.
Yeah.
But it's just conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And the older generation, people that have been around longer, and especially people that have been in the golf business and dealt with all kinds of situations, they have that intuitiveness better.
Yeah.
They have it more. They're more intuitive with that. So I think that they should actually be better at talking to people on social media than people that just aren't as, you may jump in and like kind of make a comment that's like, it wasn't too tactful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I kind of go. With my content, I have people that follow me that are much older, but the majority of it tends to be younger because it's targeted at that audience, because I'm trying to help the next generation of golf professionals kind of understand what the opportunities are. But I think that most older golf professionals are missing an opportunity to engage their members in a lot of cases. I mean, that's the opportunity to know what's going on in your members' lives and make an impact, and really like it's saving members and being part of the community. I mean, those are all things that you can do through social and make those relationships stick. So
yeah, awesome. Well, Jay, I appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah.
What if you want to put out your Instagram tagline or your anchor?
So I'm PGA Jay on Anchor too, so anchor.fm/PGA Jay, and then same on Instagram and Snap, PGA Jay. That's where I spend most of my time, so people can message me there. So have any questions, let me know.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so that was episode 22 with Jay LeDuc from the PGA Jay Show. I will see you guys next Tuesday for another episode of the TM GolfCast.